Breaking news! The Cincinnati Bengals opened the preseason with a 16-4 win over the Detroit Lions. But the score is only part of the story. What really matters right now is what we learned from the individual performances, because some players gave Bengals fans plenty to feel good about, while others raised some real concerns. Before we get into it, hit the like button and subscribe if you want more Bengals news and reactions throughout the preseason. These games may not count in the standings, but they can absolutely change roster battles, depth chart conversations, and the way we look at certain players heading into the season. Now, let's get to what matters. We have to start with Orlando Brown Jr. because his night was one of the more concerning parts of this game. For an offensive lineman, being noticed is usually not a good thing, and Brown was noticed early against Detroit after losing his man in pass protection. The defender got through and chased Joe Burrow, who was hit as he released the football. Burrow was not sacked on that specific play, but that doesn't really make it feel much better. The job of the left tackle is to keep pressure away from the quarterback, especially on the blind side, and seeing Burrow take a hit immediately gets everybody's attention. Burrow was also sacked once in the game, so it wasn't exactly the kind of night that leaves you feeling completely comfortable about the protection. The Bengals do have experience on the offensive line. Amarius Mims is expected to take another step, and Dylan Fairchild is also expected to improve. But Brown is still one of the most important players in the entire group because of where he plays and who he protects. That is why his performance matters. Brown also received a 2-year extension during the offseason, which only increases expectations. Cincinnati is counting on him, and if he struggles during the season, that could become a serious problem. Nobody should overreact to one preseason game, but nobody should completely ignore what happened either. Brown needs to be better. The good news is that Evan McPherson gave Bengals fans a completely different feeling. Money Mac had an excellent night. He finished 3 for 3 on field goals and also made his extra point. The most impressive moment came when he hit a 56-yard field goal in the rain. That's exactly the kind of kick you want to see during the preseason. McPherson has reportedly been perfect during camp so far, and that strong form carried directly into the Detroit game. He also made a career-high 89% of his field goal attempts last season, so the numbers show he has already been productive. The challenge now is about consistency and making the important kicks when Cincinnati needs them most. Against Detroit, he did everything he could do. 3 field goals, 3 makes, 1 extra point, and a 56-yarder in bad weather. That's a clear winner. Josh Johnson, on the other hand, had a much tougher night. We need to keep perspective because we're talking about Cincinnati's third-string quarterback. But starting 0 for 7 passing is still hard to ignore. Johnson eventually improved and looked more comfortable later, but the beginning was rough enough to make people wonder what the second half was going to look like. It even created a conversation about whether Cincinnati should have drafted a younger quarterback to develop. But once you look at the players the Bengals actually selected, it's not easy to say there was an obvious draft pick that should have been replaced by a developmental quarterback. And again, Johnson is QB3. If something happens to Joe Burrow, Joe Flacco is still the next option. So Johnson can be considered a loser from this specific game without turning the entire quarterback situation into a major concern. His start was bad, he got better, and Cincinnati still feels comfortable with the top 2 quarterbacks. Now let's talk about one of the biggest winners of the night. Jenkins Jr. looked very good. He played with the second and third groups and continued to stand out regardless of who was around him. There was energy in his performance. He was having fun, he showed some swagger, and he even broke out a Macarena celebration. More importantly, he made plays. That matters because Jenkins has been mentioned in trade conversations during the offseason. Cincinnati has depth at defensive tackle, and his name has repeatedly been brought up as someone the Bengals could possibly move. That makes a performance like this even more important. If your name is being discussed in that way, the best possible response is to play well enough that people have to reconsider what your value might be to the team. Jenkins did that against Detroit. As a former second-round pick, there is still a feeling that he may not have fully reached his potential yet, but this was a very encouraging start to his 2026 preseason. One game doesn't erase every question, but it definitely gives him momentum. The same cannot really be said for Taj Brooks. This felt like a missed opportunity. Brooks is a former sixth-round pick and currently the third running back on the depth chart. He didn't have much happen for him in 2025, so preseason games are extremely important for him. This is where he needs to earn trust. This is where he needs to make plays. Against Detroit, he finished with 4 carries for 11 yards and 1 catch for 8 yards. He also dropped passes and never really looked comfortable. That's why this performance was disappointing. Brooks still has 2 preseason games remaining, so he absolutely has time to respond. But this was the kind of opportunity he needed to take advantage of, and he didn't. His performance also brings back the question of whether Cincinnati needs to add a veteran running back. Again, that doesn't mean the Bengals are definitely going to make a move, but Brooks had a chance to make that conversation quieter, and instead it remains alive. Then we get to Dante Meyers, who might have delivered the best story of the entire game. Meyers caught 3 passes for almost 30 yards, and also added a 13-yard gain on an end-around. For a player fighting for a roster spot, that's exactly what you want. But the story got even better after Joe Burrow talked about him. Burrow explained that during the week before training camp, he texted Meyers asking if he was in town. Meyers said he could be. Burrow then asked if he could be there the next day, at 11. Meyers said yes. Burrow later found out that Meyers drove down from Atlanta that night so he could be there to throw the next day. That tells you a lot about the kind of opportunity Meyers is trying to take advantage of. He was playing in the Canadian Football League last year. Now he's catching passes in Bengals practices and trying to earn a place on the roster in 2026. That's exactly the kind of preseason story fans enjoy following. And Meyers didn't only help himself as a receiver. There is also the possibility that he can contribute on special teams, which could become important when Cincinnati starts making final roster decisions. Nothing is guaranteed. Meyers still appears to be fighting for his place. But after this game, he definitely gave the Bengals a reason to keep watching him. So when you look at the entire 16-4 win over Detroit, the final score almost becomes secondary. Orlando Brown Jr. gave fans a reason to be concerned about pass protection. Evan McPherson looked outstanding and continued the momentum he has built during camp. Josh Johnson struggled badly early, but improved later. Jenkins Jr. made a strong statement after being mentioned in trade conversations. Taj Brooks failed to take full advantage of an important opportunity. And Dante Meyers turned himself into one of the most interesting players to follow for the rest of the preseason. That's exactly what these games are about. You're not only watching the starters, you're watching individual players fight for roles, fight for trust, and sometimes fight for a roster spot. And now I want to know where Bengals fans stand. Who was your biggest winner against Detroit? Was it McPherson after going perfect on his field goals and hitting from 56 yards in the rain? Was it Jenkins after the way he stood out with multiple defensive groups? Or was it Meyers after his receiving performance and the story about driving down from Atlanta just to work with Burrow? And who concerns you the most? Is it Orlando Brown Jr. after that pressure allowed on Burrow's blind side? Is it Taj Brooks after a disappointing opportunity? Or was Josh Johnson's 0-for-7 start the biggest negative for you? Drop your winner and loser in the comments and tell me your confidence level in Orlando Brown Jr. right now from 1 to 10. The The Bengals got the win, but the real story is what these players do with the opportunities that come next. Who dey?